Okay. Oh man, I look weird with the glasses now. Hey guys, welcome back to Know Your Coach, the second episode in the maybe series. We'll see. Today I'm
Potential
joined.
series.
Yeah, right. Today I'm joined by Anxiety. For those who don't know, he has over a decade of competitive experience. He has placed as high as top 16 and top 18 online and on land, respectively. He has been champion number one rank specifically in Halo 5. But since then, he's transitioned into full time coaching for the New Mexico State University, where he's now a top 10 collegiate Halo coach and
Hmm.
also a Medify approved expert. Welcome, Anxiety. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
I'm very excited. This is much like with the other one, this was very spontaneous.
Yep.
It literally went from what was like a week ago. I think I put out the tweet.
Uh, if that,
Yeah,
and
and
and that's only because of the holidays. Like,
yeah, the timing was good on
yeah.
that. Um, to now we're here, so we're very excited to be bringing you guys another episode, bring more content, look more into the mind of how people coach and help the players when they're doing their thing.
Hmm.
So let's dive right into the first question if you were ready.
Yes, sir.
So I don't know if I missed the first question or if you didn't want to answer it. So if you don't, the first one would be what is a coach? But I do see that you have how does esports coaching differ from traditional coaching? So let me phrase it as what is a coach in esports and how would that differ, in your opinion, from traditional sport coaching?
So, in my opinion, well, first, let me just kind of give the context that,
Of course.
um, so I've experienced coaching in a lot of different traditional sports, basketball, football, track and field, where I coach shot put, discus, and javelin. So, from my personal opinion, when you take all those different kind of forms of coaching and you just lump that into traditional sports, um, for really the only difference between that and coaching in esports is just like the field in which your players are playing on. All the dynamics of like coaching and how to coach and how you go about coaching um, actually connect a lot between the two. Such as my own personal opinion.
No, no,
Um,
I totally
it is
agree.
it's actually like extremely similar. There's a lot of overlap.
Yeah. Well, let me adjust volume real quick. I mean, so in both senses, like it's the same concept. You know,
Hmm.
you're one, sometimes multiple people trying to watch what's happening on game or like in screen or whatever,
Hmm.
and you're just trying to make the best call for your players. You know, you're
Yeah,
doing the thinking that they don't necessarily need to do at that time.
it's all about how do I put this player in in the best position to be successful, right?
Exactly.
That can take place through practice. That can be how do I do that in like while they're playing? How do I do it after they're playing?
Yeah.
Which that's always like the constant goal because that goal, obviously, how you do it changes.
Well, especially with Halo Infinite, and you have
Hmm.
a decade competing, so you'll probably recognize this immediately. This game, compared to past Halo games, is so much more team oriented.
Absolutely.
Like, obviously, team was important in the past games, but in this one, if you're going out alone, you're down. In Halo 5, the
Yep.
movement mechanics were such that I could, 1v3 easily,
Hmm.
especially when playing with like my lower rank friends. But
Hmm.
now, if I'm playing with my lower rank friends, I'm still getting slaughtered if I'm trying to 1v2 because this
Yeah.
game is all about the team firing, playing
Yeah.
around each other.
Yeah. This game is definitely, and I say this a lot when I'm coaching, is a team with less skill that plays together will beat a team with more skill that's playing by themselves or as like individually
Yeah.
8 or 9 times out of 10.
I mean, I've experienced that myself. I played with my friends who are in plat and I'm high diamond.
Hmm.
So, not necessarily the easiest game for them to play,
Right.
but this game's so boring to solo queue. And you never want to deal with randoms.
Yeah.
So I told him that, yeah, I'll play with you guys. It's fine. And I was able to IGL or in game lead enough to where I can make the call like, this is where they're spawning. I need this
Hmm.
person on X, and then next person Y, and third person on Z. And they were outplaying the enemy team, even though they were ranked higher than they were.
Yep.
And even the straggler was able to do pretty decently because
Yeah.
we all had the setup to where they come in and you just wipe them.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's actually like really incredible. Like the way I kind of break it down is Halo Infinite is they try to do this with Halo 5, but when you look at like how these games are actually made, you look at Halo 2, you look at Halo 3, Reach, 4, all those different games. Those were games that like MLG made competitive, right? Like we adjusted maps, we adjusted settings, we did a lot of things to make it fit for the competitive community. When you look at Halo Infinite, from the ground up, 343 had a intentional direction that they wanted this game to be a competitive, arena-based shooter, team-based shooter. And so when you think about it that way, then you start to realize like every single the way the maps are designed, what weapons are on the map, where the weapons are on the map, how the map flows, how everything happens is intentionally done with is this competitive in mind. And so I think that's the biggest distinction between Halo Infinite and the other Halos where I think that understanding that is actually really important and really helps to figure out, okay, how do we approach this as a team? There's so many different ways you can play different situations, but as long as you do it as a team, that's what matters more than anything.
I mean, it's funny because like sometimes it's really aggravating the way that they've designed the game, right? Like we complain all day, but
Yeah.
at the end of the day, you're right. Like they did design it to specifically be a competitive game, even if
Hmm.
some of us do want more competitive settings, for example.
Right.
But
Yeah. I mean, like a great example is look at a map like Onslaught in Halo 3. Like, if a team has map control and they have you spawn trapped, you can't do anything about it. Like, there's one way to play that game type, and it's each team is playing like competing to play that game type the right way first or the longest. Whereas you look at something like Live Fire, Oddball in Halo Infinite, where you can set up A garage, you can set up tower, you can set up by B. There's three different areas where you can have like full setups and full control rather than being restricted to only one way to play a map correctly.
I think it's funny because since you mentioned like Onslaught, but we have a better example if you think about it, because we just got Empyrean, which is a remake of the
Hmm.
Pit, and a
Yeah,
lot of us have been talking in the community, and we're like, why does it have Pit spawns? Because you can
yeah,
spawn trap them all day,
yeah.
and I mean,
And the spawns like don't really flip on that map
yeah, exactly.
right now, so it's like
And with
extra
capture the
tough.
flag, it makes sense, right?
Hmm.
Even in Infinite, you're not gonna flip to the enemy's flag if they're in your base, but on Slayer, like, you can really torture a team,
Yeah,
and especially if you're getting the people who played Halo 3.
absolutely. Yeah.
So it's crazy. Let's get back on track though. I love the tangent, but
Yeah,
let's
no.
go into when did you decide you wanted to be a coach?
So I decided I want to be a coach pretty quickly in Halo Infinite. Coming out of Halo 5 and Halo 5 lasted way longer than it should have. But getting to a point in Halo 5 where it's like I can confidently say like I know this game at a pro level, like I know how to play it, I know what to do. I know how to, articulate. I spent a lot of time I was kind of a student of the game, that's what I always call myself.
Yeah,
Um where I just tried to break the game down as much as possible, understand everything I could about it. Um and through doing that, I learned a lot of how the game, kind of is designed and how the game truly works. And coming into Halo Infinite, um, just realizing like right now in the competitive scene, it's hard to explain those things to other players that you're trying to team with, right? Because everyone has an ego to some degree. Everybody thinks they're right. Like it's so hard as a player to like go to another player and be like, "You are wrong. This is how this needs to happen,"
Yeah.
more or less.
Oh, especially in
Um,
matchmaking.
yeah.
When you
So
know the play that they're doing is wrong and you're
yeah,
like, I could write you a book.
it's like I can tell you the next three things that are going to happen, and none of them are good. So um, recognize pretty early, like I've I felt like I can have a better impact and more of an impact just on the scene as a whole if I took the knowledge I had and gained and used that to coach other players and I would rather kind of help other teams get to that level because then that kind of raises the bar of competition, right? Like if everyone gets better, then people need to find new ways to win. Um, so I just felt like I can do that better and help more players and just make the space as a whole way better with, higher competition and things like that. Than just going through the same cycle of playing with a team makes a change super quickly, like everyone's arguing. It's like I just didn't want to deal with that.
No, I get that. It's definitely frustrating, especially when you're playing with people that you know have a like they don't have the same understanding. They don't
Hmm.
understand the mechanics the same way. Like I was
Yeah.
explaining to some friends that they would throw nades at the end of their gunfight because they didn't have the confidence. And I was like, look,
Hmm.
stop throwing the grenade. Like just don't do it
Yeah.
ever. And
Yeah.
granted, like I'm guilty of it sometimes still by
Yeah.
trying to consciously, because I'm like, if you don't throw that grenade, that gives you one more shot.
Yep.
And if
Yeah.
you're already hitting them, there's a good chance you could finish that fight right there and at
Yeah.
least trade. Because if you're throwing the grenade and then they're running forward, doesn't get hit, they don't die, you're just dead for no reason. You're not helping
Yeah.
your team at all. But
Yeah.
if you're at least firing that last bullet and you can break them and kill them, you get that trade, that helps your team out immensely.
Hmm.
Now they're not on a 4v3, they're on a 3v3.
Yep.
And it's the same thing with oddball. Dude, I hate
Yeah.
oddball in matchmaking.
Yeah.
You
It's the
always have
worst.
that one person that's like, I gotta hold the ball. And you're like, bro, drop the ball and shoot.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
you gotta, or capture the flag.
Like
Like,
they like
you gotta
forget to
slay
like
out.
play it.
Exactly. Like, you gotta slay out.
Mm.
Then you get to objective. And then usually you gotta drop objective and slay out again,
Yeah.
especially in this game.
Or even
Five,
like
I
knowing
could just
where
not
to
worry.
play it.
Yeah, exactly. Like you have to know the positionings to hold, like live fire. Good
Yeah.
spots to hold are back B, tower, because they're
Yep.
easy to hold and they're easy to play
Yeah.
if you get
Yeah.
overwhelmed.
Right now my biggest gripe is whenever I'm playing Aquarius flag and people pull the flag to like fridge and try to run it P side. That drives me absolutely insane. It's like this
Yeah,
will never work. This doesn't work. Please stop doing this. Oh look, now they're not only do we not cap this flag, but the counter capped. Like it's a
yeah,
whole thing.
exactly. Always go seaside, guys.
Yeah.
Or if you get a good wipe, you just run down mid.
Yeah. I mean,
But
you
I
you
wouldn't
could try
always
it.
recommend that.
Yeah.
Well, you got to get a good wipe for that. That's got to be four dead
Yeah.
immediately.
Everything has to happen perfectly for you to do that.
You also have to hit that nice drop slide off of commando,
Yeah. Yeah. Like
which
just play it safe, take it utility, be done with it.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I had that. I had it where you drop slide off commando, you hit
Hmm.
X, and the game just goes, no.
Yeah.
Then you're
Yeah.
just
That's yeah.
sat on table like a dummy.
Yeah. It'll happen.
So you have this knowledge of Halo 5. You decide with Infinite,
Hmm.
all right, you know what? I don't want to be a player anymore. Obviously play for fun because game's fun.
Hmm.
But how did you go from that decision to then becoming a coach?
Um. So the way I officially became a coach was pretty simple. Um. I was at work one time, scrolling through Twitter, saw New Mexico State. Just I honestly don't know how it ended up on my timeline because there was like no reason for it to be there. Um, but they got my algorithm, got my timeline. Saw them posting that they were looking for players for a bunch of different titles for the semester. Halo was one of them. Shot them a DM. Hey, are you guys looking for a coach? Um, they were like, possibly. We'll have our talent person reach out to you. Talk to them, and the rest was kind of history.
Nice.
Um, got brought on as a coach and coached them for the fall semester.
You gotta love it when things just work out that way.
Yeah. Yeah, I was like, obviously this was kind of meant to be in a way because, like I said, I don't know why that tweet was on my timeline, but it was and it worked out.
And you've enjoyed it since.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Very gratifying to help lead the team to victory.
yeah, yeah, for sure. It's like the most gratifying thing for me is always like that moment when like a player like gets it.
Yeah.
Like like we, I was going over some things like early on, and there was a moment where like one of the players was like, "Oh my God, this is happening exactly how Anxiety said it would," and I was like, "Yeah, dude, like I know a little bit. Like
I,
that's what I'm
I've,
here
I've been
for."
around a few times.
Yeah.
So, what would you say that are the main jobs of a coach?
So so in my opinion, there's three main jobs. Like I said earlier, the first and foremost is putting your players in the best position to succeed or be successful or win.
Of course.
Just putting them in a position for positive things to happen. Um, from there, the way you do that is number one, your job is assessing. Whether you're assessing a player's gameplay, whether you're assessing, a certain situation, trying to figure out why a situation happened the way it did. Whether you're assessing a match and the teams that are playing against each other. And then from there your main job is developing. So you want to develop your players, um, developing talent so that way when it comes time where things matter, they're able to execute and perform well and makes it easier for you to put them in positions to be successful.
Yeah, a lot of VOD reviews, your
Yeah.
team, the other teams in the league, see how
Yeah,
everyone's
getting like
playing.
examples of things like just teaching, guiding, things like that.
Yeah, exactly. So when you're doing these reviews and things like that, do you actually play the game yourself? Obviously, like when you maybe you're trying to come up with strategy, you're like, oh, maybe we test this out in matchmaking, or do
Yeah.
you
So
leave it for your players to do?
um so of course I played the game myself. I will say I have had like right now I'm working with a Call of Duty team
Hmm.
a little bit. And I'm helping them out. I don't necessarily I haven't played the newest Call of Duty, but I've competed in Call of Duty in the past, and there's a lot of things from Halo that translate into Call of Duty, so I'm able to help them even a little bit. But when it comes to Halo, um, definitely play the game because it's hard to listen to a coach who it's like Diamond Two. It's like okay, like what, like how are you going to tell me what to do?
Yeah, you're like,
Um,
I gotta at least get that Onyx rank.
yeah, but I mean, playing the game is always a good way to
Yeah.
make sure if I'm saying something as a fact, a good way to make sure that I know it's a fact because I've done it. Um, so it's definitely like a big part of what I try to do.
Plus, it's good if you're coaching a game that you enjoy playing yourself
Yeah.
because you have to. It's one thing to know
Hmm.
how a game works, especially when you've played the same franchise for years.
Right.
I'm over 2 decades in Halo now because I played since Combat
Hmm.
Evolved. But that being said, you can have the knowledge of previous titles, but if you don't have a knowledge of the mechanics themselves because you're
Right.
not playing that game, especially as things are changing, yeah,
Yep.
it
Exactly.
definitely earns a lot more respect from the players as well
Yeah.
because
But
there's a two-way lane, right? You have to respect the players, they got to respect you.
hmm yeah, and I mean everything's always evolving. I mean, like imagine trying to coach in Halo Infinite. When the game came out, purely based off of your previous experience, right? None of that is going to prepare you for things like snap sliding
Yeah.
or any of those kind of mechanics. So playing the game really helps keep you up to date on what's happening, what's possible, and just how the game is being played right now.
Well, especially like to mention mechanic that came out with this one, drop sliding, since that one's
Hmm.
still in the game. Imagine you have a player, especially you're at a university level, so sometimes the players don't have that level of knowledge. You have to know how
Right.
to explain how
Hmm.
to drop slide, what it is, where you can do it, what's kind of the requirements,
Yep.
certain height, distance, how can you optimize that? And you have to be able to show them on top of that.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
having
Being
that,
able to communicate is a huge part of being a coach.
yeah, exactly. Be able to, especially just formulate thoughts in general, I would say.
Hmm.
It's really
Yeah.
important.
Absolutely.
Roughly, how much time do you spend, like, when you're doing this preparing versus coaching, would you
Hmm.
say?
Excuse me. So I would say, um, hour wise, I mean, I haven't tracked my hours. It's a lot.
You're fine.
Um, but I would say I do about 90%, preparing,
Hmm.
10% coaching. And what I mean by that is 90% of what I'm doing to help the team is behind the scenes. Like
Yeah.
they're not on, they're not playing, they're not with me, they're not going through things with me. And so I'm trying to do all the heavy lifting so that way when they get on for scrims or they get on for practice or they want to go over something with me individually, that process is a lot more streamlined and takes a lot less time, which means that we can, improve on a lot more, a lot faster.
I like that you specifically said the heavy lifting
Hmm.
because the coach is there to take on mentally what the players can't. Sometimes competing at that level, you're not focused on is the sniper up, is the OS up, and the coach is
Yep.
there like, hey guys, OS is up, or you're looking at all four screens, and sometimes you hear a call out, and if you're really in the zone, you don't always you're like, oh,
Respond to it.
heard, got it, like
Hmm.
top tower, oh, heard top tower, but then it's just out your
Yes.
brain because something else comes up, and you be like, hey, like,
Yeah. And I mean, like, one of the other like big things too when it comes to esports is like, obviously this applies to coaches as well, but a lot of players don't know what they don't know.
yeah.
And so figuring out like, okay, like why are they doing this? Okay, obviously they're doing this because they don't know how to play this. And so now how am I gonna communicate this to this player so they're able to moving forward?
So what would you say your philosophy is then when you're coaching?
So my overall philosophy is pretty simple but also like kind of complicated. So my approach is like most players and most teams are capable of like playing at a very high level. And what I mean by high level is like top 64, 32, and so on and so forth. A lot of players, more than what, players realize and teams realize, a lot of them are capable of doing that. The difference between pro players and non-pro players is not that huge of a gap. Um, so my philosophy is, you have a team, you have a player where I know I'm investing a lot as a coach, so I want to have teams and players who are equally invested or more invested. And as long as that mutual kind of investment is there in each other, um, I'm just there to kind of facilitate that improvement to that level.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Like the gap between a pro and not at the high level, of course. It's not it's not very wide, but it's
Hmm.
deep.
Yeah, yeah,
Like
exactly. It,
uh,
it it comes down to like really nuanced kind of
exactly.
details that
Until
nobody
you have
knows or
someone explain it to you.
exactly.
Because like you said, you don't know what you don't know until you
Hmm.
find until someone tells you, right?
Exactly.
And so until you hit that point where something's explained to you and then it clicks, and you're like, oh, and you're like a whole new player at that point.
Right. Yeah. Because I mean, just me just telling you what the right thing to do is doesn't necessarily help you.
I think a great example is like
Um.
being told like, hey, play your life.
Mhm.
Sometimes people don't know what that means to play your life,
Yeah.
or they don't know how to segment off enemies. You could be
Hmm.
a really good shot, but until someone explains to you like, hey, you need to hug this cover.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
on
Like
you're on
you don't have to challenge everything.
exactly, like you're on control, right? And there's someone top gold and there's someone in like bottom gold. If you just back off to the stairs, you can segment
Yeah.
off top gold, and
Yep.
then you're
Yeah.
fighting a 1v1, not a 1v2.
Yep. Yeah. Or like, hey, like you have map control and a power weapon. Like, stay there.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, you don't
That's
have to.
the
You don't have
biggest
to always
thing
be moving.
is like slow down. And it's
Hmm.
something I'm guilty with, especially a lot of my friends are lower skill than me. And
Hmm.
so I got into a really bad habit of chasing and hunting
Right.
because like, oh yeah, I can easily drop 25 kills in a Slayer game.
Hmm.
But now that I'm getting up in Onyx again, I have to slow it down.
Yep.
And it's always interesting watching matchmaking because if you watch the pros play, you watch Worlds or Orlando or any of the other big events, in a Slayer game especially, you'll notice it just slows to a standstill.
Yeah.
No one wants to give an inch. And matchmaking is just go, 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 go.
Yeah. And like even, just like touch on like watching pro plays
Yeah,
or pro players play. Um, because this is something again that I find myself saying to almost every player, right? When you watch a pro player play, you should be looking for like small specific things that they're doing that you can also do. Um, I think a lot of players will watch these pro teams play and will try to just like mimic what they do, and it doesn't work that way because there's a again, not knowing what you don't know is these pro players know how to play every situation. They know exactly what's going to happen all the time. Like they spawn up, they know where everybody is, they know exactly where they're supposed to go, and so they're playing chess, we're playing checkers.
yeah, exactly.
So you
I was
so
about
you
to make that analogy.
you can't just like watch a pro player or pro team and be like we should do what this team does, because again, like you don't know the why they're doing it that way,
Yeah,
and their why is going to be completely different from what ours is because in again these pro teams play each other all the time, so they're playing to counter specific things each these players that they know are doing, whereas like you don't know the team you're playing against regardless.
which is a
So
it's a great example of also like coach preparation
mm-hmm,
because, like you said, there's they're playing each other all the time. So as a coach, you can look at the scrims and
yep,
identify like, oh, hey, you know, this person went this way. Why they
right,
do
which is
that? Or like there's
what
a weakness in the flank maybe here. And so then you could be like, hey, you need to watch this and set up this way
mm-hmm,
instead. That will specifically counter that, and it will not work in matchmaking.
yep, and that's where like the college levels gets really interesting, right? Because I think there's about 50 or 60 teams in this league, but there's a lot of teams like you can run into. So the college level is a really good like kind of proving ground to start developing even as a coach if your goals are to coach at a pro level.
Yeah.
Like assessing teams like you've seen before and preparing your team for a specific team and a specific thing they do. That's where like for me like the biggest interest in the college level is because you do have that factor a little bit versus like strictly HCS, where like any given Saturday or Sunday or whenever the tournaments are, you play any. These teams change every single day, so like you never know who you're playing or anything like that.
It's like the good old days of MLG.
Yeah,
You go to one event with a team, go to the next event with a whole new team.
yeah, exactly. Don't
Well,
even like make it to Tuesday.
yeah, exactly. What's your what's your play style when you coach? And then how does that reflect on your philosophy of coaching?
So my play style kind of fluctuates depending on how much I'm in my head or not. Um, when I'm playing really well, it comes down to just like I'll end up playing really fast, but that's because I've done enough repetitions and learned enough to where I'm predicting and I'm not reacting.
Yeah.
And so when you start predicting versus reacting, especially in matchmaking and things like that, you tend to pop off. And the more you get, the more repetitions you get in doing that, the faster you're able to predict and things like that. And so I reflect that in my coaching where, you know, my goal is to get you from reacting to predicting. I was just talking to a player last night where, they're starting to kind of learn how to predict what area a team might be or what area a team might be coming from. And I was explaining, like, understand you're going to get to a point where you're going to learn to predict not only those things, but also the timing of things.
Yeah.
So you're going to know, okay, if I just place my reticle right here, they're just going to walk into it, run into it. Um, and like, that's when you're going to really start having fun. Um, is when you're able to do those things. So I would say like that's the biggest thing that's reflected from my gameplay to my coaching.
That's really interesting. I like the way that you describe that, and I now that I'm reflecting on it in my head as you're discussing this, I was playing last night and I made a comment. I was like, wow, like my KD was awful until the very end. And then I just really separated had higher kills, less deaths.
Yeah.
And I was like, why is that the case? And sometimes, like, you just start out bad. And this happens
Yeah.
to everyone. But thinking about it, it's because toward the end of a game, teams get more desperate. It's so much easier to predict them sometimes,
Yep.
especially
Yeah.
matchmaking players. They
Hmm.
they usually play the same style,
Everybody
depending
wants to
on
make a play.
exactly. And I think toward the end of the games, it's easier to predict that. Uh,
Hmm.
and that just makes all the difference in the world right there. Especially, I'm a big sniper, and
Hmm.
walking into the reticle is a great example. A lot of people don't know with the sniper rifle, for whatever reason, that you don't have to center it on the person. The best way to play the S7 is to aim in front of them and let them walk into you.
Yeah.
It is the easiest way because that reticle is so small. Unless you're on mouse and keyboard. If you're on mouse and keyboard, disregard that because your accuracy is going
Yeah.
to be way better. But on a
Yeah.
controller, if you just wait, they cross in, you pull that trigger, you get that shot. And so I'm constantly hitting headshots with the sniper because I can predict where people are going to go. I
Yeah.
set up, I go, all right, there's one of two spots. Where's the most likely spot they're going to go based on where they're spawning? There. And then you just punish. And the
Yeah.
pit is another phenomenal example of that. You get that sniper, you set up in house, you wipe the team, you know where they're going to spawn, you just start picking.
Yeah. Yeah. Or even, I mean, if someone's pushing you, a lot of people have a bad habit of jumping, right? When
Yep.
you jump,
I have that habit from
you're on a
Halo
fixed
3.
path. So you can shoot him, like you can make me one shot, that's fine. Like shooting me three times is not going to kill me. So I'm just going to place my reticle at the bottom of your jump because you can't change it. And I'm just going to get a no scope, and you're going to send me messages that I'm cheating, and
I feel
then
so called out right
everything will
now.
be fine.
You can tell an older player if they're jumping at the end of the
Yeah.
gunfight.
Yeah. It's a hard habit to break. Like,
I'm still trying to break it. I'm like,
yeah.
oh yeah, I should crouch instead, jump. I'm like, well,
Yeah. So
why'd I do
there I
that
go
one?
again. It's
Yeah,
like, oh look, I lost another gunfight.
yeah. But so like, that's a you're if you're teaching a player not to jump, what do you do if they challenge your call?
So um typically I don't have players kind of challenge things. It's only happened a handful of times.
Mhm.
Um but it's really not a big deal because ultimately, like I said, I try to really make sure I'm on top of like knowing what I'm like talking about.
Yeah, yeah,
And I also have no problem with saying like what I'm saying is an opinion or like I'm not sure, but this is what I think. But if I'm stating something as a fact, um, I'm very confident in that, and I can also explain it. So typically, like if a player you tell them to do A and they're like, "Well, I think I should do B," it's just a quick explanation, like, "Okay, well, like here's why that doesn't work, and here's why I'm telling you to do this, and like here are like the different things like you need to like recognize in doing that." And usually, like after I explain it, they're like, "Oh, okay, like that makes sense," and then they'll try it and be like, "Oh, wow, you're right," and then it's like, "Fine." So,
oh, you do know what you're
um,
talking about.
yeah, like again, like even with over the college season, I had a player on Aquarius flag where I was like, "Stop pulling the flag P side. Like we need to not do that." And it was like a really quick conversation. They're like, "Oh, well, I just feel like when we P side like X, Y, and Z," and I said, "Okay, that's fine. How many times did that work?" Like none. I'm like, "Oh, you lost 5-0. So obviously pulling the flag to that side is the right way, right?" They're like, "Oh, probably not." Like, so it's like also like asking different kind of questions like that to get them to kind of think about it. And
Well, I think having them think is a good approach
right.
because you're not just explaining your opinion, you're helping
Hmm.
them understand the opinion. And those are two
Yeah,
different
that's always the
things.
first thing is like, hey, why like especially if it's like them like directly challenging what I'm saying. Okay, well,
Yeah.
why do you think that? And then they explain it, and then you just gave me everything I need to know to explain to you why that's not the case. So,
Almost lead them into it rather than
hmm,
have to explain it outright because it'll stick with them better if they
yeah,
realize themselves what the problem is and they're like, "Oh, that's what you're saying."
yeah, yeah, exactly.
But how do you when they they're four down because they're just pulling P side? How are you keeping that morale up? Because it'd be
So
demotivating sometimes when you have like 6, 7 pulls in a game and they're just shutting you down every time, counter capping on top of that.
yeah, so I mean, if I'm you know if it's a situation where We've gone over things like we know what we want to try to do. We know what our general kind of goal is. Um, it's always just reminding them the first step of going to do that. So, for example, Aquarius is like just ends up being a really good map to like you had like come up with examples for these situations. But like,
It's because Aquarius sucks.
yeah, so like on Aquarius flag, if I can tell that my team is flustered if they're spawning fridge and everyone's just beelining bottom mid, top mid, P side, their fridge, things like that. So it's just like reminding them, like, hey guys, if we're spawning fridge, like work back to our flag, get utility control. And just like reminding them, you know, everything is a process and there's multiple steps to that process.
Yeah.
So just reminding them what the first step is. Like you can't start at step 3. It's not gonna work. So focus on step 1 and get it done and keep going and keep trying to do that until we get it done. um, rather than just let everything go to the wayside. And now we're playing a 4-man free for all against a team.
Yeah. It gets rough when your players are funneling like that and you have to figure out how to pull them out of that. Or
Yeah,
tunneling, sorry, when they're tunneling like that and you have to figure out how to pull them away from that.
yeah,
Get them to focus back up, realize that's not a good play. Let's actually add some
hmm
strategy into it.
yeah. Just quick reminders are like live fire. If we start drifting because we're looking for kills, and it's like,
Yeah.
hey, like we're not playing Slayer, so like stop chasing kills.
When you're reviewing these games, what are you looking for in the footage?
So typically, what I'm looking for is I have in front of me what did we already talk about, what did we go over, you know, and how do we talk about improving on a certain thing. So first and foremost is looking for, are they working on that thing? And if so, are they doing it successfully? Or if they're not doing it successfully, it's okay. Well, I can see that they're trying to do this. So where do we need to go from here? And then off of that, it's okay. So if they're getting close to having, this specific thing down, what's the next thing that we want to look to work on? And how do we want to go about doing that? So those are pretty much the two different, I guess, dynamics that I approach VOD reviews with. Is they're here and now, and then the kind of what's next to improve on.
Yeah. Well, because you can be like, all right, that works really well, and you can keep that in mind for the future. And then you have to identify where are they going to improve, though.
Right.
This worked well, but maybe later in the game it didn't work out so well. And why? Why did that happen? Where was the shift? Yeah, I think that it's important to identify both. Honestly, I think more people focus on the what went wrong, but you have to realize the what went well, and then in the middle, where did that shift? Why did that shift? Because it's not
Right.
necessarily like, oh, we all got wiped on C. That went wrong. Okay, yeah, cool. We got wiped on C, but why did you get wiped on C? Where did you make the change?
Yep. And identifying kind of like the moment things happen. So a
Exactly.
lot of players don't realize like you lost C 3 steps ago. Like this one bad play, 35 seconds beforehand, caused a snowball effect to us losing C. So let's instead of focusing on we lost C, let's look at this moment and how do we work on not doing that or what we can do differently in order to prevent that whole situation from happening in the first place.
Yeah. When you have a player that's struggling to, in those VOD reviews, how do you help them to improve if they're just not getting it?
Um, well, honestly, that's kind of where an ability to communicate is the most important. Um, everybody learns differently. Everybody processes things differently. Everybody learns differently. So, um, if somebody's not getting something that I'm trying to teach them or coach them on, it's okay. Well, I need to figure out what it is that you're not getting, and I need to figure out how do I get you to take this information and understand it. So whether that's giving you a more detailed explanation, whether it's coming up, I'll make like a little like overhead diagram or something like that if I need to give you a visual way to learn this thing, or if I need to record a video and give you like a live example of that specific thing. Um, either which way, I'm going to figure out the best way for you to learn that thing, so you can get it because it's important that you get it, obviously. Um, so just figuring out, the best way that they learn and kind of just doing that. That's on me.
I love the way that you diversify too, where you're like, oh, okay, I can explain it to you. Oh, okay, you're not getting it. Let me draw you a diagram. Oh, it doesn't make sense. All
Yeah.
right, let's record a video. All right,
Hmm.
let's take you in game. It,
Yeah. Or
it,
even asking questions like, what about this do you not understand? Like, why is this
yeah.
confusing? Like, about this is confusing to you? And let's figure it out.
And then that also really just that helps you later down the road too. You have the same player come back, and you're like, all right, well, I remember how you learn.
Hmm.
So now we can just kind of skip steps 1 and 2 and go straight into 3 because I
Yep.
already know what to do at this point.
Yeah.
So you've played on LAN, you've played
Right.
online. I assume you've coached on both as well.
Yep.
So what goes into coaching on stage?
Um. So when it comes to coaching on stage, my number one thing is making sure everybody's head is in the game. Something I've kind of found out throughout my career is bright lights do things to people. Um, so my one of my 1A 1B. My 1A is kind of feeling out like the emotional wave that the team is on,
Okay, yeah.
um, and guiding that. And if someone needs to kind of be lassoed in, or somebody needs to be remotivated, or if someone needs to be directed or calmed down, whatever it is, keeping those things in check, because those are the things that when you're on the stage, um, or when you're on a stream, or when you're on anything, those are going to be some of the biggest factors that cause players to play abnormally
Yeah.
and make mistakes that they might not otherwise make.
I think a lot of people like they think, "Oh yeah, I can play on stage." I don't think they realize when you get on stage, you see the people, you have the lights beaming down on you,
Hmm.
and you know, a lot of players wear 2 sets of headphones. They wear earbuds and then
Yep.
they wear their headset on top of that. And that's
Yeah,
because
there's a lot of different things happening.
you have to block out the sound. A wonderful example is HCS released the Grand Championship Finals
Hmm.
audio, and you can hear in the Optic comms the crowd doing their "Let's Go Optic" chant,
Yep.
and those guys are pros. They're really good at focusing. But to a new player, you step on
Yeah.
stage for the first time, you're hearing that in the comms, and that suddenly pulls you out. And you realize, wow, I'm playing in front of 70, 80,000 people,
Hmm.
and that can be really nerve wracking. Adrenaline starts
Even
pumping.
even before you get to that point, I mean, right now in esports, a lot of things happen online. Local tournaments are a little bit harder to run. So you're getting a lot of people who might go to these majors with no LAN experience.
Yeah, exactly.
I do not know a single player who went to their first lane and didn't like wasn't shaking to the point where they could barely hold their controller in like the first round that they played on lane. Like I don't know what it happened to me. Like my first lane, I don't know what it is. It's like I go into warm ups, everything's fine in warm ups, like everything is cool, and then all of a sudden that tournament starts and there's the thought of like real, and it doesn't even have to be on main stage. It could just be your first time on lane. Like that's a thing, um, to
It's
kind of prepare people players for.
it's almost sobering, so to
Hmm.
say. You get up there and you realize, wow, I made it to this point. Wow, what do I
Yeah,
do next? What's going
yeah,
on? So, and being able to recognize that as a coach, I'm sure it helps that you can try and comfort that player immediately.
yep,
And I'm sure that you're also prepping your players anyway before you get to LAN.
yeah, yeah,
But there's, like you said, there's only so much preparation you can really do. A
yeah.
lot of them are just playing online right now.
Hmm.
So, speaking of coaching online, what are the differences would you say between LAN and online coaching?
So for me, the biggest differences is dealing with just online connections, right?
Okay. Oh, especially with these
So,
servers.
yeah, so like, well, in the sense of coaching, I mean, it's tough to watch everything at once online. You're either watching, for me, it's I'm either watching somebody's screen on Discord, or even if I'm watching multiple screens being shared on Discord. Um, you always have to factor in that there's some kind of latency involved.
Yeah.
And so, my biggest thing always going into matches is like, how can I watch this with the most minimum amount of delay possible? Um, on LAN, you don't have to worry about that. Number one.
You have access
Number
to the
two,
screens so much easier.
yeah. Number two, it's like instead of four screens kind of being broken up onto one, I have four full screens I can watch. So it makes it a lot easier to track things. It makes it, me personally, for me to track deaths of the other team and
Yeah.
watch kills that are happening across the map and just really be a lot more effective and efficient in coaching um, and directing the team and what's kind of going on throughout the
S-
map.
Snakebite said that when he goes to LAN, the reason why he wants to sit in the middle is because when he's on death screen or just has a
Yep,
moment, he can look left and he can look right at what his teammates are doing. So
yep,
then he can more effectively IGL.
yep. Or even if I have a sniper, it's a lot faster for me to just peek left and right than to say, do I have my help?
Yeah.
Like I can actually just see that instead of asking that. So now that just again effective in the game.
So many times on live fire have I been top mid or top tower and be like, is someone watching me? And then just
Yeah,
hit from the back. And you're like, all right, well, I guess no one's watching.
yeah,
So they have sniper.
yep. All right, responding out. Here we go.
Yeah, right. How do you keep up with the new techniques that or plays that are coming to the game? It's a lot to keep up with sometimes, especially when they drop new maps.
Yeah, so it can be. I think one of the biggest things that I try to do is as a coach, I try to be ahead of those things.
Yeah,
Um, so I will, you know, right now we're in a stage where we're dealing with like new maps, right? So I'll go into a map by myself and try to just find every single thing I can find in that map, um, and then have that to bring to the team, anything that is worthwhile for them to try to know or try to use. If I just sit here and wait for things to show up on Twitter, you know,
you're already behind the
the,
curve
the
at that point.
yeah, and this is something that's popular in Call of Duty, but or even in Halo 5, there's a good example of where Frosty found an angle. I think it was on Eden, where he had a sniper angle through a staircase. And a lot of those things, these pro teams aren't breaking out until that game really matters. It had to have either been the finals or the semifinals. So again, it's like if I just rely on social media, Twitter, pro teams aren't going to show me everything.
Yeah.
So it's on me to go and find those things on my own. That'll kind of help separate the team I'm coaching on a map.
What is it? I know on Aquarius, there's a spot where you can sit. I think it's in the connector where you can see directly into C1 and C2. And then on
Hmm.
the other side, you can see directly into the utils
Yep. Yeah.
with
Or even
without
there.
showing yourself because it's just there's just a gap in the map.
Yeah. Or there's like a jump, like a ghost ledge that you can
Yeah,
use to jump up to top mid.
there was
All
one
types of
on
like different things.
the pit that just got patched, and there's another one I knew of in detachment that also got patched out, unfortunately.
Hmm.
So what?
Yeah. It's always trying to find those things.
Yeah, it takes time. You have to really be. You're less of a player at that point and more of like a game tester, where
Exactly.
you're just trying to think like, what exploits could there be? How can I find them?
Yeah.
And just it's like going through with a fine tooth comb and just
Yeah.
hunting.
And like when you have to be like really, really locked into where like you're really noticing changes. I mean, I remember in Halo 5, like when it came to like the problem with heavy aim, like me and Maniac were like this is definitely a like you guys need to pay attention and like you just get response like your head casing just get better and it's like no, like what server I'm on and how much actually makes it harder for me to aim. So just being aware of that
I,
makes it a little bit easier.
I have a friend uh, who plays in the EU HCS scene, and he will not stop going on and on about heavy aim in Halo 5.
Yeah, like it was a bane of my existence for a very long time.
Yeah.
So I'm right there with him.
What qualities do you think an aspiring coach should have?
Um, excuse me. So when it comes to qualities, I think first and foremost, communication is like number one. If you don't know how to first and foremost articulate your thoughts, and then if you don't know how to express those to people, you can't do your job. Your whole job is telling people things to make them better, when you boil it down, if you can't communicate with people, you're not going to be a good coach. If you can't communicate with somebody who just doesn't understand the first time you say something, if you can't communicate with somebody who disagrees with you, um, if you can't just explain an idea that you have and get feedback on it, you're not going to be able to coach. Second, I would say, you need to have a crazy work ethic and actually be dedicated to coaching, because it it's a lot harder than playing, but when you get good at it, I think it's a lot more fun than playing. But it takes a lot of time to do that. If I go and we play one series, that series takes 2 hours. Just me reviewing it now that I'm at 4 hours, just playing through it, and then if I break it down, that's another 2 hours. You're looking at 6 or 8 hours for one match. Um, so communicating, also always asking questions. Like I know that's not necessarily equality, but I think that's something that's really important that gets lost, especially in Halo, where you're always asking questions in terms of you always want to know what your team might be struggling on or what direction they want to, try to go in. Um, if you're assessing, a gameplay and something happens, okay, why is that happening? Why did this player win this gunfight? Why did they lose? And also for me, the biggest thing is I ask questions to players that I coach of, is what I'm saying making sense to you? And are you finding the way that I'm explaining this to you helpful? Um,
I really like those last two. Those are
yeah, cause,
I
'cause
wouldn't
my
have thought those
biggest thing,
personally.
yeah, it's like I want to make sure that, you know, you're not having a hard time taking this information in. Even, on Medify, I had somebody yesterday who I sent them like a code just for a free like VOD review.
Hmm.
It's like, hey, like this is something we haven't done yet. You might find this to be more helpful. Why don't you take this promo code? Why don't you do like set up a VOD review and just see if you like that. You only want to do VOD reviews. Find that to be the most helpful. I think that's like one of the best ways to improve as a coach and to make sure that you're.
That's really awesome. It goes also to like the I'm a huge fan of like give back to the community, especially
Mhm.
in Halo. We're such a small community, and it,
Right.
it dwindles every update.
Yeah. Yeah.
So just supporting like now when you found my tweet and you went, hey,
Mhm.
you're a nobody. I'll come sit down and talk to you for an
I'm a
hour
nobody
about
too.
coaching.
Yeah. Yeah.
More known than
I'm a
I am.
nobody and I have a common interest. So,
Do you have any tips for aspiring coaches outside of that?
um, yeah, I would say the biggest biggest one is realizing what coaching is. There's a book by this guy Alex Hormozy that some people may or may not know who he is, but he's in the fitness kind of industry, but he has a really good quote where he says, if this is applies to personal trainers, but same kind of um where it's you're not in the fitness business, you're not in the health business, you're in the accountability. And so the biggest part of being a coach is that your main job is to hold players accountable to the improvement that they say that they want to get. Um, as long as you do that, everything else will kind of work itself out. But once I know even me at first, it's like, do I really want to make like tip videos? Because if I start posting tips, like, what am I going to coach? Like, I don't know. But like me as a coach, it's like there's always going to be something that I can help you improve on that you're not going to get from like a social media post. And again, it's like if you say you want to get better, you know, I'm there to hold you accountable to that. Where it's like, hey, like you're not doing that will actually make you better. Um, so if you like actually want to do this, like here's what you need to do. Like I know you're saying that you want this, but like your actions aren't matching that. So main tip is hold people accountable. Always just try to find ways to improve. Um, the other kind of big thing I would say is like I said earlier, um, I have a lot of different coaching experience in different sports.
Yeah.
Um, even soccer, like I learned about how soccer managers coach their team.
Hmm.
Um, try to learn about coaching in other sports, other fields, and things like that because you might find something that you know predominantly happens in soccer or basketball, and you might be able to translate that concept into how you coach in Halo.
I think it's important because esports is such a new sport,
Hmm.
but those have
Right.
been around for 100 years,
Yeah.
more probably. Uh,
Hmm.
so being able to try and take stuff from other games and be able to apply that into your style and your game that you're
Hmm.
playing, that'd be really powerful for anyone who takes that advice right
Yeah.
there. And I really like the quote that you shared. That's a really good quote.
Thank
That's be cut up. That's
you.
going on a short right there.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
But also like because players will watch tip videos all day,
Hmm.
like oh best 5 tips will get you Onyx, 10 tips will get you Onyx.
Yeah.
But if you're just watching it and you're not applying it, what's the point of watching it? Like right
Yeah.
the other day, I was watching someone do a VOD review. I'm trying to think of who. I think it was Above Average Cody. I was watching his own. He's reviewing his own VOD of a victory that he had because he's like, oh, we focus on the defeats all the time. It's like, but this was a victory that we had, and he's like, I just felt like I was making all the right plays, and he's like, one of the things that I did better than usual was my not game sense. It was his decision making.
Hmm.
And he's like, I didn't jump down and challenge this like I or follow. I didn't follow like I
Hmm.
normally would. And because I didn't do that, I was able to get that guy and the next guy that came in. But if I dropped down, then I've been on a 1v2.
Yeah.
And then he's like,
Yeah.
I also made sure I saw where my friends were, my allies were. I had someone criticize me one time because like, why do you take a second when you spawn? You're like an NPC. And when I'm taking a second when I spawn because I'm seeing where everyone is.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
I
Which
can't see
is
you, my immediate line of sight, I know exactly where I got to go. Not that
yeah.
way.
Yeah. That it's actually funny. Like that's the first time I've heard that conversation happen that way. Whereas usually I'm saying the opposite, where it's like, hey man, like I'm noticing that you're spraying as soon as you're spawning, which tells me that while you're waiting to respawn, you're already pressing your you're already looking to sprint and you don't know where you're going. You have no idea where you're going to be going when you spawn up. It's like, why are you sprinting? Just take a second, see what's happening, and then go. Like, I promise you it'll help you.
It was a habit I had to break as well
Yeah.
personally though. Was I was just trying to sprint off spawn, just trying to get to my team.
Hmm.
But I had a guy complaining. He's like, why are you taking a second to spawn? You should have come to help me on tower. I was like, dude, I spawned on A. You were alone on tower with the ball.
Yeah.
And when I died, there was at least 2 people there. I'm not sprinting from back A all the way to tower because by the
Yeah.
time I hit mid or God forbid C, you're
Yeah.
gonna be dead. I'm gonna be out there alone.
Yeah.
Instead, you know, you're alone. Play the ball.
Just reset.
Wait till all of us come back. Yeah, just reset
Yeah.
everything. I'm like, there's no point in me because so many times players will see their teammate. They'll see one guy, and usually they're across the map in enemy territory, and they're like, "Oh, I
Yeah.
gotta sprint and help this guy." Like he's calling out,
Yeah.
but by the time you get there, that person's going to be dead, and then you're
Yeah.
caught. And sometimes maybe you'll pick it up and get it, but it's so much
Yeah.
better to look where the majority of your teammates are and go toward them because, like we discussed earlier in the conversation, this is a team game.
Hmm.
If you are not with your team, you are not going to win.
Absolutely. Yeah. Or like just waiting for your team to respawn. Like
Exactly. You
things like
don't
that.
always have to fly out as soon as you spawn.
Yeah. I mean, when you're first to spawn up and you're spawning out, the map is a square. Your last teammate's over here. You're spawning over here, which means the entire enemy team is in between you guys. So
Exactly.
like
Why would you sprint across the map into
you just think you're gonna
uncertainty?
run through them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like what are you expecting? They're all gonna have their back turned. You're just gonna backstack, backstack, backstack. Oh look, I
Yeah.
saved you. I'm a hero.
Hmm.
That's usually it's not how it's gonna happen.
Yeah. Never.
Well, that
Might get you out of platinum, but like that's about
can.
it.
I've said that all the time. Where I'm like, if you have natural skill or just like you've worked on it, right? You have good skill. You can easily get to diamond.
Yeah. Or I
But
mean, I've even seen people get into high onyx with just skill
that would be natural skill right there.
and like what I explain is like, listen, like there's levels and there's stages. So like you're really good at matchmaking. You're really good at playing the game by yourself. Okay. Now play with three people that are on your team, because now you're not like in matchmaking. You maybe have one or two people who are communicating, like you're pretty much just doing your own thing. All of a sudden, you have three people. Now you're not used to hearing four voices all the time. You know, while you're playing. So now that's like the next thing you have to get used. Okay, no, okay, cool. So you're good at being back against four players who may or may not be communicating. Okay, go. Let me show you an eights lobby where now all eight players are able to communicate and able to try to kind of work together and do certain things. Oh, okay, you got good at that. Okay, now let's go into a team. Now not only all eight players communicate, all eight players are doing their thing. They're also intentionally trying to work together and do things specifically to beat situations, and they're on the same page. And that right there is like the biggest gap that matchmaking players struggle with. It's because like you're really good when like no one's on the same page, but once you have four people all on the same page, it's a whole different game.
The first thing I would think about would be did you play the Halo Reach campaign
Yeah,
when Noble Six first gets in the opening cutscene
yeah,
to Carter, and Carter's like, "I read your file, even the parts they didn't want me to read." It's like that lone wolf stuff doesn't work with Noble.
yep,
It's that moment right there. You're like,
yeah,
oh, you're a 1700 Onyx, and you only play by yourself. Yeah, that's not gonna fly here.
yeah,
But it can also be disorienting, like you said. How many times are you getting a perfect matchmaking when you're solo queuing where all four people are talking? You never do.
yeah,
And so if you're doing your thing and then you're suddenly going to three other people making call outs, that's another thing you got to focus on.
yep,
You're not just focused on what you're doing, you're focused on what your team is doing now. And
yeah.
then you have to also remember, I have to stay with my team.
Mm-hmm.
So it's all there. Yeah, like you said, there's stages. There's stages to
Yeah,
being a player.
yeah. You got to build it.
And obviously, the top teams, they've mastered this.
Yeah, and what a lot of these players have to understand too is like these pro teams have to stay together.
Yeah.
Like they're on contracts, they have to play on those rosters. So like one of my biggest things, like just kind of to any amateur like teams, is like stick together. Like you will improve if you guys stick together and improve as a team. You will get so much farther than if you try to make roster changes, if you try to make subs, if you try to do anything to like change the group that's playing. Just stick together and improve as a team. Like that way, when you start playing these pro teams who are playing as a team, they're used to playing as a team, they practice as a team, and they've been doing it for months. It might be a little bit easier for you.
The most frustrating thing to me is like when you find someone you're really good with, like, oh, wow, we just naturally work together. And then they're just gone like the next week. And you're like, oh,
Yeah,
dang it. Come back. I need you.
yeah, yeah. Which again, I mean, that's where the college landscape gets a little bit interesting, right? It's 7 weeks of playing together. So now we
Ni-
more or less have to play as a team and improve as a team.
nice little boot camp right there.
Yeah, yeah, like it's massive.
Well, that concludes my questions, but I did see a few in the audience. If you want to take some audience questions real quick,
Yeah, sure. I
but
don't have the chat pulled up, so if you just want to
I've got it, so I'm
fire
going to
those off.
read it out.